On April 11, 1970, the world watched as NASA launched what was supposed to be a routine mission to the Moon. Apollo 13 was meant to be humanity's third successful lunar landing. The goal was simple: land on the Moon, conduct scientific experiments, and return safely to Earth. But just 2 days into the mission, a single sentence sent shockwaves across the planet. "Houston, we've had a problem." In that moment, Apollo 13 transformed from a mission of exploration into one of the greatest survival stories in human history. 3 astronauts were suddenly trapped hundreds of thousands of kilometers away from Earth, their spacecraft crippled, their oxygen running out, and their chances of survival shrinking by the hour. What exactly went wrong? How close did Apollo 13 come to total disaster? And why is this mission, despite never landing on the Moon, considered one of NASA's greatest successes? This is the mystery of the Apollo 13 mission, a story of danger, science, human courage, and the thin line between life and death in space. To understand Apollo 13, we must first understand the era in which it was launched. The late 1960s were dominated by the space race, a fierce competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. Space was no longer just about science. It was about power, prestige, and proving technological superiority. In 1961, President John F. Kennedy made a bold promise. "We choose to go to the Moon and do the other things not because they are easy, but because they are hard." By 1969, that promise was fulfilled. Apollo 11 successfully landed Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin on the Moon. Apollo 12 followed soon after, proving that the first landing was no fluke. By the time Apollo 13 was scheduled, the excitement had faded. The Moon landings were starting to feel routine. Television ratings were dropping. Many believed NASA had already proven its point. But space is never routine. Apollo 13 carried 3 astronauts, each experienced, disciplined, and highly trained. James A. Lovell Jr., the commander. Jim Lovell was a veteran astronaut. Apollo 13 would be his 4th spaceflight, more than any other astronaut at the time. Calm under pressure, Lovell was known for his leadership and steady decision-making. John Jack Swigert, the command module pilot. Swigert was a late replacement. Just days before launch, the original pilot was exposed to measles and removed from the mission. Swigert stepped in with limited time to train with the crew. Some later questioned whether this last-minute change played a role in what happened next. Fred Haise, the Lunar Module pilot. Haise was preparing to walk on the Moon for the first time. Highly skilled and deeply knowledgeable about spacecraft systems, he would later become critically ill during the mission. Together, these 3 men boarded Apollo 13, unaware that they were about to face one of the most terrifying ordeals in space history. Apollo 13 lifted off from Kennedy Space Center aboard a Saturn V rocket, the most powerful rocket ever built. The launch was nearly perfect. The spacecraft entered Earth orbit, then fired its engines toward the Moon. Everything appeared normal. Minor issues occurred, but nothing unusual for a space mission. For nearly 2 days, Apollo 13 cruised through space, drifting farther from Earth than any human had ever gone before. Then, disaster struck. On April 13, 1970, at 55 hours and 54 minutes into the mission, Mission Control asked the crew to stir the oxygen tanks, a routine procedure. Jack Swigert flipped a switch. Seconds later, a loud bang echoed through the spacecraft. The ship shook violently. Warning lights flashed. Jim Lovell looked out the window and saw something terrifying. Oxygen, vital for breathing and power, was venting into space. One of the oxygen tanks had exploded. Without oxygen, the spacecraft could not generate electricity. Without electricity, life support systems would fail. Apollo 13 was no longer a mission to the Moon. It was a fight to survive. The famous line is often misquoted. What Jack Swigert actually said was, "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem here." Those words triggered immediate panic inside Mission Control. Engineers scrambled to understand what had happened. Data streams flooded computer screens. Telemetry showed rapidly dropping oxygen levels. Within hours, NASA made the unthinkable decision. The Moon landing was canceled. The priority was now simple: bring the astronauts home alive. The command module, named Odyssey, was designed to support life, but only with functioning oxygen tanks. As oxygen escaped, fuel cells shut down one by one. The astronauts were forced to power down Odyssey completely. This had never been done before. The command module became a cold, dark coffin, saving what little power remained for re-entry. The crew moved into the Lunar Module, Aquarius, which was never designed to keep 3 men alive for days. It was supposed to support 2 astronauts for a short stay on the moon. Now it was their lifeboat. Apollo 13 was now drifting around the moon with no engine capable of turning it back toward Earth. At least, none that had been designed for that purpose. The Lunar Module's descent engine became their only hope. But using it incorrectly could send the spacecraft spinning into deep space, forever lost. Every burn had to be calculated manually. With limited power and failing systems, astronauts and engineers worked together under unimaginable pressure. One wrong calculation, one misaligned burn, and Apollo 13 would never return. As if the explosion wasn't enough, another invisible threat emerged. Carbon dioxide levels inside the Lunar Module began to rise. Too much CO2 can cause confusion, unconsciousness, and death. The problem? The Lunar Module and Command Module used different-shaped CO2 filters. Square filters wouldn't fit into round openings. NASA engineers famously improvised a solution using duct tape, plastic bags, cardboard, flight manuals. This mailbox invention saved the crew's lives. It remains one of the most brilliant examples of problem-solving under pressure. With systems shut down, temperatures inside the spacecraft dropped close to freezing. The astronauts shivered constantly. Food was rationed. Water was nearly gone. Fred Hayes developed a painful urinary infection, accompanied by fever. Sleep became nearly impossible. Yet despite the physical suffering, the crew remained disciplined, calm, and focused. Fear had no place, only survival. Apollo 13 looped around the far side of the moon. For a brief period, the spacecraft was completely out of communication with Earth. 3 men, alone, farther from home than any humans before them. If something went wrong during that silence, no one would know. That moment remains one of the most haunting chapters in space exploration. As Apollo 13 approached Earth, one terrifying question remained. Was the heat shield damaged? The explosion could have compromised it. If the heat shield failed, the spacecraft would burn up in Earth's atmosphere. Mission Control could do nothing but wait. Radio blackout began. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Finally, a signal. Parachute. Apollo 13 splashed down safely in the Pacific Ocean on April 17, 1970. Against all odds, the crew was alive. Later investigations revealed a shocking truth. The oxygen tank that exploded had been damaged years earlier during ground testing. A faulty thermostat caused the wiring insulation to melt. When the tank was activated in space, it ignited. A small, overlooked detail nearly cost 3 lives. Apollo 13 never landed on the moon. But it proved something even more important. Human ingenuity can overcome impossible odds. Teamwork can defeat disaster. Calm thinking saves lives. NASA later called Apollo 13 a successful failure. A mission that failed its objective but succeeded in its ultimate goal, bringing the crew home. The Apollo 13 mission changed space exploration forever. Safety procedures were rewritten. Engineering standards were improved. And the world was reminded that space is beautiful but unforgiving. Apollo 13 wasn't about landing on the moon. It was about survival. It was about hope. And it was about the courage to face the unknown, even when lost in space. End card/call to action. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of the greatest mysteries and survival stories in space history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. What do you think? Was Apollo 13 NASA's greatest failure or its greatest success?